Welcome to the October 28th OpenJ9 community call. So I'll pause here for a minute as people join so that they can add their names to the list, just so we know who's all been joining the call. And I'll pause and just give people an opportunity to add anything they want to the agenda at this point if it hasn't already been added, or to bring up any community-focused questions. All right, then I will step forward. Mike, you are tentatively targeted today for a lightning talk. Are you ready for that?
Yeah, should be ready.
All right, do you want to take over the sharing then?
Sure. Let me figure out how to share.
I'll stop sharing. That may make it easier.
Does that show up?
It does, yes.
All right. So I guess I'll get started. Hi, my name is Mike Zhang. I work on the OpenJ9 VM team, and today I'm here to give a lightning talk on JEP 352, which is non-volatile map byte buffers. So some background on what NVM is. So non-volatile just basically means that the data is preserved even without power. This is contrasted to RAM, which you lose your data once the power's off. So some examples include flash memory or hard drives. So traditionally, RAM is a lot faster, like orders of magnitude faster than the non-volatile memory we use for storage. However, there are some new types of non-volatile memory that do like slowly close a gap in performance when compared to RAM. So examples include the new NVMe SSDs, which are noticeably faster because the protocol is designed with SSDs in mind, as well as new technology introduced in 2015 by Intel and Micron called 3D XPoint, more commonly known as Optane, as branded by Intel. So next slide, we see that where Intel considers their NVM solution Optane. So basically they see it as a cache in between traditional RAM and traditional storage. So it's has benefits both. It's high performing, but it is also persistent, and you get much more memory per dollar spent. Because traditionally RAM is very expensive for the size. And yeah, with increasing NVM speeds, it will allow us to use that as a solution, as either a replacement for older storage or as a cache between older storage and RAM. So, which this ties into the motivation for this JEP, as NVM can allow significantly faster speeds than traditional storage. We obviously want to take advantage of that in Java. In C, there are libraries that take advantage of low-level NVM access. They allow you to directly map a file over a NVM-backed device. So example is libpmem by Intel. This doesn't exist in Java before this JEP. So that puts Java developers at a disadvantage. And relying on these libraries, or are you relying on a system call to access non-volatile memory can be slow because you would need to either go through JNI or a system call for each line of memory you write back to the NVM device, which has a lot of overhead. So the goal for this JEP is to allow users to get a direct mapping on NVM device. So using the create a map byte buffer via the file channel API. We also want this map byte buffer to have low overhead writes when you're actually writing back, or else it would be kind of pointless. So it should at least be better than relying on libraries or system calls to write back to commit any changes from memory to the actual backing device. And the last goal is to have a management bean that tracks the stats of map byte buffers that are on top of NVM. So since this JEP aims to provide low-level access to non-volatile memory devices, it only targets Linux x86-64 and ARch64. So solve goal 1, which is to provide users to actually be able to create a mapping over non-volatile memory. The JEP aims to create a new module, which is JDK NIO map mode, which contains the two new modes that are actually used to refer to the mappings. So it's read-only sync and read-write sync that are the two map modes that are used for mapping to NVM. So these modes correspond to the map sync option for mmap, the mmap system call in Linux. And this is one of the reasons why the target is so narrow, because if it relies on mmap to actually do the mapping, so we can only support the platforms that support this. So the management bean is just the new buffer pool MX bean so it's another one that's added when you get the list of management beans. And this one tracks tracks the same thing as all the other buffer pool MX beans, but for non-volatile memory only. So it tracks buffer count, total memory committed, and the memory used. The original bean for map memory still exists, but it's only for memory mapped to normal files. And the most important goal is performant NVM write back. So map buffer has the force method, which forces commit from the buffer into actual memory or storage. So yeah, for traditionally, I think map byte buffer uses a system call, which would not be useful in this case because it would have a lot of overhead. So in this case, the writeback method is implemented into unsafe class because in the future Java we might need direct access to non-volatile memory outside the scope of map byte buffer. So the two methods that are added are writeback memory and is writeback enabled, which checks that if you can actually do the writeback. And these methods are implemented using, or the write back memory is implemented using CPU instructions to do the actual write back, do the actual commit to memory. So in OpenJ9, we implement the write back using option of the three write back mechanics instructions in the Intel x86 spec. So the three options are CLWB, which is cache line write back, CL flush opt, which is cache line flush optimized, and CL flush. So CL flush is the slowest option, but is supported on most Intel CPUs. It is ordered with respect to other calls of itself on a cache line, so it can run into slowdowns that way. CL flush opt is not ordered with respect to additional calls on the same cache line, so the CPU can get more performance that way, and CLWB does not actually need to flush the cache when it does its write back, so it does not need to do the actual invalidating. It is the newest option. However, I think it was introduced in the instruction set with Skylake, but I think it was the next optimization where it actually became available. So not many machines will actually have that option. But OpenJ9 will check the processor capabilities and pick the best one, pick the latest one that is actually available. And that's actually it for this presentation. Any questions, concerns?
Thanks, Mike. I wondered if there's any connection between this and some of the new foreign memory access JEPs. Are they using the same unsafe calls for the NVM buffers?
I think there's been discussion on using NVM for off-heap stuff, for like storing for off-heap memory management and stuff like that. But when I last checked, it was still an open issue essentially so I don't think they went too far with that. And I'm not too familiar with the foreign memory stuff. So I don't think necessarily related.
Okay. Does anyone else have any questions for Mike?
I was just a little curious with those Intel instructions that you outlined that have different write ordering guarantees. Those obviously will interact differently with the running program, right? Because whether you do two sequential, calls to this thing to do the write or not, and what order they'll show up in will vary depending on the instruction. So, are there different APIs in Java to represent these different things, or are they expecting a certain memory model, or how does this interact?
Okay, so more specifically, when you call like write back memory, so I guess the main performance concern is when you have to write many lines sequential or many small writes. So when you call write back memory, it forces a barrier, I think both before and after, and then it will pick the I guess, best CPU instruction to write all the cache lines in the range you specified. So
Okay, so it's like issuing basically like a full fence before, and then it runs
yes,
whichever of these, and then it runs a full fence after.
yeah, and the
How
JEP,
do you get
I
different
believe
performance
that's
out of these then if you're doing a full fence after each one? Like how is it that these can be faster if you're still having to halt for the flush? Like having to halt for the barrier after?
not quite sure, but I believe that just the sequential calls to flush opt and seal WB is just faster than seal flush in general.
Oh, right. Like I can understand that, especially given the ordering constraints, right? But if the implementation is going to put the barriers between the flush operations, right? If you're going to insert the full fence anyway, I'm a little unclear how like CL flush and CL flush opt would give you any different performance because you're essentially telling the CPU to do the same thing either by integrating it or not, right?
So if your memory range is large enough, you'll have multiple calls to the write back instruction, and I believe that's where the performance gain comes from by choosing a better flush instruction rather than the old one.
Okay, so you might need multiple instructions to actually do the flush that was requested by the
Yeah,
API call.
yeah. So like write back memory is a range,
Okay.
and you
Okay, and so
can give
then
it
and
like
then there's a
what?
maximum length that's associated with each of those lines, and therefore you have to pick the
Yeah,
instruction you're going to use. Okay. All right, and then you put full fences around that sequence of
the
flashbacks. Okay. Okay. Now I
yes,
understand. Thank you.
no problem.
Hey, Mike, I have a question. So I think was the goal number one you mentioned that it's the sync flags are dependent on the mmap call with the map underscore sync, yeah. And but map
Yep.
sync is only available at least for Linux on 4.15, which is quite a
Yes.
new version of Linux. So does that mean this JEP is going to only be available on newer versions of Linux?
Yes. It will. At least for the um at least for the map byte buffer, it should only be available on the newer version of Linux. For the OpenJ9 implementation for like the unsafe methods, you can probably still write back memory on older versions as long as your CPU supports it. But like for uh before like actually using the Java API, the well public facing Java APIs of creating a byte buffer and then using that, this will only be available on a limited number of platforms, namely the new version of Linux.
Okay, that makes sense. Thanks.
I think eventually we might get more support, or just eventually people will upgrade versions of Linux, but yeah,
Cool. Thanks.
no problem.
Thanks, Mike. I really appreciate you taking the time to update the community around this JEP and the work you've been doing there.
Yeah,
Looking
no
at the
problem.
time, we'll adjust back to the rest of our call. So I will sharing again. Again, thank you, Mike, for giving us that talk. We do need to get some of these other talks lined up in the future. So if you do have one of these talks that you'd like to give or another topic, reach out to me via Slack and we can get something set up. One of the other things we usually do is take a look at the user-raised issues. And so if I'm going to look at just the ones that came in since the last one of these calls, so that's the top 2 issues here. There's a question around Tomcat web app jars not being cached. All right, and it looks like this is being addressed. Also an issue with OpenJ9 15 crashing when Gradle. Looks like that's being looked at as well. So thank you to everyone who's jumped on those. Continue to focus on bringing down those and addressing those new user-raised issues. A reminder around the help wanted issues. If you do come across some minor cleanup that can be done, these are good things to tag with help wanted or beginner and use those to help people onboard into the community and into contributing to OpenJ9. In the interest of, actually, we should take a quick look at the download stats. Seeing an uptick again in the downloads, which makes sense given the recent releases. Is there anything anyone wants to call out around the download numbers? Jump back and take a look at our recent releases. So we had the Java 15 release in September, and we have just GA'd the 0.23 milestone with the Java 8, 11, and 15 updates. And so the next release we are working towards, of course, is the 0.24 release of the quarterly updates in January. Thanks to Peter, I assume, for tagging in the tentative dates on those. Please, do be looking at that milestone plan and making sure that we're bringing down all the items that are in that plan so that we're able to release on time there.
If no one has any objections to those dates, we'll make them non-tentative.
The M2 start around January 4. I don't know how many people will have around to be doing the builds would be the only question.
Yeah, I figured we could start with that, and if we have to delay it by a week, we will do so. Depends on, it's not holidays, so it depends on when people take vacation time.
Yeah, and setting the code split to early December makes sense as well.
Is there anybody who can confirm the GA date for OpenJDK? I'm not sure I have the formula down.
Closest to the 17th, the closest Tuesday to the 17th, I believe.
Okay.
Closest Tuesday to the 17th? Okay, yeah. So on that basis, it looks right to me.
Before we move on, Shelley was asking that we do a release retrospective on the Java 15 release in September because we delayed it. And I guess that caused some problems at Adopt.
Okay. So I see there are some questions here around, can we define what a stop ship issue is?
Yeah, so I don't know if we have a proper definition. I think we decided on the call to delay the release because the issue was a problem in a new feature that was supposed to be working in Java 15. It's me who wrote this stuff in.
Okay, yep.
But I don't know if we have any kind of formal definition of what a stop ship issue is. what's going to hold up a release and what's not. Maybe not something we need to figure out on this call right now, but might be something worth having for the future.
Yeah, maybe I can create an OpenJ9 discussion issue for it. This last release went smoother than the September one for sure, but it's worth, I think, as a project, us having the discussion.
Yeah, so I think what happened is one of the features wasn't working. That feature should have been working. We wanted to delay and see if we could fix it. The fix was taking too long. And we knew we had another release coming up shortly, so we thought we'd just go ahead rather than waiting for it. If we'd had to wait 3 months for that, for the next release, then maybe we would have waited and released late.
Mm-hmm.
But that
So
didn't make
yeah,
sense.
right. And then from the adopt perspective, if that is the case, the sooner we know, the better, because I think it would change how we would release the different products we have out of that project. So, okay, I think we could take this offline from this meeting and just have an issue where we throw some guidelines around how we would.
Yeah, I would say if OpenJ9 is going to take too long to release, then adopt should go ahead with their release activities.
Yeah.
And we could pick up OpenJ9 at a further, at a later time. And if things have been broken in the meantime, then hopefully they'd be fixed quickly, but that's just the risk that OpenJ9 would have to take for shipping late.
In this particular case, was it a cross-platform problem, or was it specific to a particular architecture?
I think it was P specific.
Because that may be another option for us, is to proceed.
Right, release everything except a particular platform delays. Yeah.
Well, I guess the problem was we didn't know, right? We were on a day-by-day slip trying to figure out what the problem was. In the end, we figured out it was a P-specific problem, but we didn't necessarily know that in the beginning.
Yeah. Apologies, I'm going to have to drop now for an Aquavit meeting, but I did put some notes in the adopt update. And I'll catch up with you later, Pete. Thanks.
Okay, thanks.
I just mentioned for the sake of completeness that there are a lot of JEPs lining up for JDK 16. Some are big and some are small. But with all of that feature work, there is an increased risk that we may find issues later in the test cycle, just because there is going to be so much new stuff landing, right? Like the more we change, the more likely it is we're going to break something, right? I suspect JDK 17 may also be like that because of the rush of things to get in. So we may just need to be prepared for that.
So as a project, we're going to have to make a decision. Do we ship something that may not be working just so we can have something out there? Or do we delay and wait for everything to be working before we put out our new Java versions?
Yeah, I think that's an important question, especially when it comes to incubator features. And Dan, I am well aware of the need for us to properly support incubator features and the requirements around that, but it's just that there is a lot of new functional work that happens around that, and it's easy to make mistakes, or especially corner cases, and we may find them late in the test cycle, is just my concern, despite everyone's best efforts and due diligence.
Yeah, there's certainly risk there. And I think this will probably be an evolving discussion as we go through each release, depending on what the state of the project is as we get close to those releases. Continuing to focus on those earlier code splits will help. I know with the September release, we moved the code split back, and we had a significant number of items that had to be delivered after that code split date, which certainly introduces that greater risk that you mentioned, Andrew, and gives us less time to respond to any issues that may come out.
Yep. And the flip side of that is if we move the split earlier, there's a risk that we may not get all of the feature work that we would want for some of the JEPs perhaps done just because of limitations on community resources and time to implement things. So as you say, it's an evolving discussion, but I think it's something we should all be mindful of because of the complexities it causes.
Being cognizant of the time, is there anything that anyone else wants to call out around release retrospectives? Continue on. The ARch64 functional testing at Adopt, we had created an issue for this. Is this still something that needs to be covered in the agenda?
Probably not. We were running the functional testing for JDK 11. If OpenJDK had the capacity, we'd maybe try to extend that to JDK 8, but I don't know that we need to discuss it on the call.
At this point. In terms of the next item on our agenda, the JIT server deployments in Kubernetes.
So Raghu is not on the call, and he said he might join next week, but not this week. Some of you may not be aware, but Raghu moved to a different team, and I will take over the issue. Unfortunately, I didn't have much time this week to work on this, and probably going forward, things are going to move slowly because I think one is to have hands-on experience to come up with a sensible solution. And my goal is to first build that hands-on experience as much as I can or as much as the time permits.
Thanks for the update. In terms of the general business, just looking at the notes that have been added here, there's a link to the Adopt release retrospective. There's a mention of, sorry, I'm trying to map this to trying to make sense of what this update is on the October 20th. So it sounds like Gradle will download a JDK from Adopt OpenJDK. That's pretty great for Adopt. Congrats on recognition of all the hard work they've been putting into, and it's great to see it come from the broader community as well. I know Shelley had to drop. Stuart, do you have any update on Adopt?
Not really. Obviously, most of our attention has been with the releases and so on. We had to re-release the macOS builds for J9 because the wrong license file had been included. So that was done a little bit later. Nothing else really from an OpenJ9 perspective.
Thank you.
Stuart, I updated an issue that I found about the compiler for Windows. I don't know if you saw my update, but we'd like to switch to Visual Studio 2013 for Windows Java 8 compiles. But when we do that, we'll only support 2013. So it has to be done in OpenJ9 and Adopt at the same time.
Okay, I haven't seen that update yet, but I'll chase it up. Thanks.
In terms of machines update, Adam?
Yeah, so we were having issues with some of the Windows machines. They're all online now. We were having issues with number 4 most recently, so it was rebooted about a half an hour ago, so we'll have to keep an eye on it to see if issues persist with it. The Arch machine died on us when we were trying to make some adjustments to it. So Raj and Joe are going to look at it maybe tomorrow and get it rebuilt. Other than that, I think everything's okay. Well, we're having a discussion about the UNB Artifactory mirror. So the issue is we only keep a couple days worth of history there. So if you launch a grinder on one of the UMB platforms, so P Linux, X Linux, Mac, and it's been more than a couple days, the SDK will fail to pull, even though the SDK might still be on the OSU artifactory. So we're trying to discuss workarounds around that. We might just give more space to the artifactory since we have the free space there. But in the meantime, if you do run into that, you can hack the URL of the SDK to just go to the IP, and then you won't get redirected, and it should work. If you have problems or questions about that, you can message one of the info people.
Thanks, Adam. In terms of the any other business, Abneed, is there an update on the method handles migration?
Yes, I think we are very close to achieving functionality, and only few PRs are pending to be merged. And work has been started on the build scripts for the nightly and PR builds, and weekly design scrums between all the stakeholders continue. And this sums up the update for this week. Back to you, Dan.
Neat. Devin, is there an update in terms of the CMake migration?
So there was a fix I had for the compile flags in the JIT, which got held up because it inadvertently broke aches. I think I have it now not breaking aches. Currently, there's the PR test running on it, and so far it's passing. And then after that, we're not applying the copyright info in the metadata of the DLLs. So just implementing that should be a day or two, and that should be it for Windows. And on the ZOS side, I'm getting almost all the way through the compile. It looks like the last thing that's catching me up is an issue with compiling DDR, which I'm working through now. And then after that, it's seeing how well it does on all the tests.
Sounds good. Devin? We already discussed the Helm and the operator issue, so we'll skip over that. Scott, do you have an update for the microjet?
Yeah, so there's been a recent push to the PR. It's pretty minor compared to the last one. It removed the dependency on an additional field to the J9 method structure, so there's no more requirement there. And we've fixed the problem where methods that failed to compile with microjet would be reattempted with microjet. They'll now default to TR on the next attempt to compile.
Sounds good. Is the next, are the microjet design meetings still ongoing?
They are, and the next one is on the 5th of November, the week before CASCON, and the next one after that is the 19th, which is the week after CASCON.
Thank you. Checking to see if Daryl is on. Don't see him. No, we've had this item on our list for a little bit. Had updated it previously that it was trying to proceed. I see that that the auto build of the ARM platform has been disabled. So I guess at this point this just becomes a code cleanup exercise. We'll remove that from the agenda. Is there an update around the documentation automation?
Not at the moment, no.
And Andrew, is there further updates around the profiling talk, the CANOSP?
Yeah, so the
project?
students are making good progress. So we had the first sort of demo of a working version last week, where they were able to show that the agent was able to get perf profiles, contended monitor, enter information from JVM-TI, some basic object allocation stats, and basically able to work with either a fixed command file supplied on the command line or interactive commands from an agent, and was able to store data out to either a file or stream it to connected agents. So they've got all the basic functionality. There's some bugs that they're working through, and they're going to prepare a better demo for this week. So in our weekly meeting on Friday, we'll see where they're at, and if they're ready and there's no other lightning talk scheduled, I may try and slot it in next week for them, just so that they can show everybody where they're at and see if we'd like to put this into like OpenJ9 util or something for the time being. They've got some more instrumentation that they're going to add. We're going to work on some of the J9 specific stuff, like the tier 2, tier 3 spinning for contended monitors and things like that. And yeah, basically, hopefully by the end of the term, which will be early December, we should have a fairly nice little perf agent that's pretty self-contained.
It's great to hear. I do hope they're ready for next week, because that would be a great lightning talk.
Yep, we'll just see. I just need to make, like, they've not done a lot of talks, so we're just helping them make sure that they're sort of on message so that we can get it done in the time available. I have high hopes, so hopefully I'll get in touch with you later in the week.
Sounds good. Are there any other topics that need to be brought up today? In that case, thank you everyone for the call today, and we'll meet again on November 4th.
Thanks, Dan.
Thanks.